Today is the final week, as Reverend Laura mentioned, in our August series that has been based on a hero's journey. It comes from Joseph Campbell and this recognition that every life is a story and is a journey of sense. Connie, it'll be a little bit if you want to be seated. Thank you. And it could also be called, the series could also be called If These Pews Could Talk, because this has been your opportunity to share. Or perhaps we could call it The Skin That We're In and the Love That We Are. There's something dynamic that happens when we share our story from the consciousness of recognizing God in all things, of being willing to find the blessing, of being very real and saying everything that happens is not good, and good can still come from everything that happens. Compassion can be born, understanding, love. There's new things that can always come. So this month we've been sharing our stories of tears and triumph, of being lost and being found. And essentially every one of these stories are a love story. Not so much in the sense of a Romeo-Juliet love story, but a God is love story. That the essence of who and what and all that we are is an expression of love. And so today, we're going to look at this through the context of what I'm calling the religious politics of belonging, worthiness, and judgments that we make that keep us separate. The religious politics of belonging and worthiness, and the judgments we make that keep us separated from our own truth, from our own experiencing of the fullness of all that God is and all that we are, and certainly the judgments that would separate us from one another. In the scriptures, it's most easily explained because the scriptures say God is love. God is love. And during the time of Jesus, under the Mosaic law, there were over 600 laws that the children of Israel, the Jewish people, the people following the Mosaic law were supposed to understand and keep and follow. That's a lot of laws to remember. And so trying to trick up Jesus one day, some of the master teachers, the scribes and Pharisees said, tell us, if you had to summarize the law, what's the most important? What would it be? And he said, the highest teaching of all is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. He summed it up as love. And he also did something very radical there because he said love makes no distinction. You see, to love the Lord your God, to love your neighbor, to love yourself, he said that they're one and the same, that they were equally important. And so what his life and his teachings were about were to demonstrate that love, to really embody it, to be a living demonstration of what that love and that power was. And he also sought to point out the barriers and the blocks to that love. One of the stories in which he does this it takes place just a very short period of time before Jesus is captured and is crucified. And according to the writings, we believe he sort of sees the handwriting on the wall, and it's sort of like he's had it. And he really wants to go out with a bang. He really wants people to get what he's been trying to say. And so what does he do? He goes into the temple where the money changers, these are the religious authorities they're changing money. So when people come in order to enter into the temple, in order to have your spirit restored, in order to be into the good graces of God as they believed, you had to pass through a priest who would offer some sort of atonement for your sins. And that atonement usually took the form of some sort of sacrifice, maybe 2 turtle doves, maybe a goat, depending on what you did and how bad you were. And so these money changers were the ones that were doling that out. The money changers were the ones that were basically saying, they were announcing judgment on the people. They were saying, oh, you've done this, well, you're going to need this. Oh, if you want God's blessings, you're going to need this. And so Jesus goes in and literally turns over their tables. Now, they were not doing anything illegal. As a matter of fact, what they were doing was part of the religious protocol. But he goes in and he turns it upside down. He turns it over because he's basically saying, how dare you? How dare you be a judge? How dare you say, well, you need this to gain entrance. You need this. He was saying, how dare you judge? Have you not heard that God is equally loving and accessible to all? And so it was very radical. And it wasn't very long after that that he was crucified and killed. But I want us to get the message of what was taking place there. Because what he said, my house is a house of prayer for all people. My house, the blessings are available for all people. So he's turning something very upside down. There's a writer, Robin Meyer, in a book titled Saving Jesus from the Church. It's a really interesting title. He writes, indeed, a quick glance around this broken world makes it painfully obvious that we don't need more arguments on behalf of God. We don't need more people judging on behalf of God. We don't need more people saying God said this and God said that. We need more people who live as if they are in a covenant with unconditional love, which best describes and is our best definition of God. How many of you want to be in a covenant with unconditional love? Yeah, that's my prayer. Whoever did that, welcome to you. Be in a covenant with unconditional love. So in all three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's a story that's found in every single one of them. And anytime we find a story that shows up in all Gospels, the scholars tend to say that there tends to be more likelihood that that story was legitimately carried and was meant to convey an important message. So there's a story that is carried in all three of those, and it's actually two stories that are hinged together. And the way Mark shares this story is like this. He tells the story of Jesus is growing in his popularity. He's this sort of self-appointed teacher and rabbi and holy man. And people are following him not because of that, but people are following him because of what they are experiencing, what is happening. Radical change, healing, freedom, all sorts of things are taking place. So he had been performing some miracles. People were following him. He's just taken a boat trip and arrives in Copernicus. He gets off the boat, and there is a man by the name of Jairus. Now, the important thing to know about Jairus is that Jairus was an official in one of the temples. So Jairus worked in the synagogue. He was a religious leader. He would have been one of those people that probably passed judgment on people. He, of all people, would have known the Mosaic law and would have been bound to carrying that law. But here's the thing. Jairus' daughter, who was 12 years old, was dying. And so the scripture says that Jairus, who was moved with love, did something very unorthodox. When this man Jesus came, he went and got on his knees. Now, he's a religious leader who gets on his knees in front of this very controversial man and says, I need help. Would you please come to my house and heal my daughter? She is dying. Now, all of those around are thinking, wow, this just does not happen. This is like the head of the Catholic Church going to the Dalai Lama and saying, would you pray for me? And needs, it's just really, the people that were following are like, wow. So Jesus begins with them, and he says, we need to hurry. We need to hurry because she's dying. And so they're headed off together, and there are crowds of people following. And the crowds of people that are following, some of them were the followers of Jesus, but some of them were the ones that were looking at this Jewish religious leader saying, what is he doing? I want to go see. So all of these mix of people are running together very quickly to Jairus' house. Now the introduction of a second story. Just as they're moving along, Jesus stops and said, who touched me? The disciples said, excuse me, there's hundreds of people around you, like who touched you? Who didn't touch you? May be a more appropriate question. I paraphrased that a little bit, but that's basically the way that what they said. Who didn't touch you? And he said, I felt virtue leave. Who touched me? And he turned around and he looked, and there was a woman whose head was covered, and she apparently hadn't wanted to be seen, but she needed healing. This woman, the story says, had an issue of blood for 12 years. Now, it doesn't say more because it didn't need to say more. To that audience, a person who had been bleeding for 12 years, blood was considered unclean. The book of Leviticus, the law is very clear about any time someone contacts with blood or if a woman was bleeding, you were to be sequestered. No one could sit where you sat. No one could touch any object that you touched. No one could eat food that you prepared. You were unclean as long as you were bleeding. And the scripture said that a person had to have 7 days of not bleeding and then had to go to the temple and have 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. It's in Leviticus. It really is this stuff. You could read it. That had to happen in order to be clean. So this woman, notice now some parallels. We've got a religious leader with a daughter who is how old? 12 years old. We've got a woman who's been bleeding how long? 12 years. 12 is the number of spiritual power and wholeness. So there's something else going on. So here are these 2 stories. So the minute she is risking her life, and the minute he says, "Who touched me?" and he looks at her, the scripture says she told him her whole story. She confesses in front of the crowd. According to the law, she was to be stoned because she had just contaminated everybody she had touched. She was to be stoned. And because she had touched Jesus, guess what? He was now unclean. And so all those people that were hurrying to get to Jairus' house are saying, "Oh God, mission aborted. He's got to go back. He's now been defiled. This is just, who is this woman who does this?" So all of these things are going on, and she's telling him, "I've been to every doctor. I've spent all my money. I'm in desperate need." And he does something very that surprises the crowd. He in no way acknowledges her as being unclean. He himself doesn't act like that had happened. Instead, he says, "Daughter." Now remember, Jairus, another man, is wanting to get to his who? Daughter. Jesus makes a point in front of this crowd to say, "Daughter, your faith has made you whole." He didn't say, "Because you touched me." He didn't say, "I've got some magical powers." In front of this whole crowd, he said, "Daughter, your faith has made you whole." Nobody was showing up on your behalf. You didn't have a daddy who worked in the temple who knew me and can get me to go to his house. You had to fight for it. But your faith has made you whole. Go and be in peace. And so just as that story comes to a happy ending for one person, her, the whole crowd is thinking, now what's Jesus going to... He's been contaminated. It's exactly what that audience would have been thinking. But he says, "Come, Jairus." And Jairus, now, this political leader has to make he's already asked this man to come to his house. Now he's witnessed everybody's been contaminated. The rabbi's been contaminated. Will he be moved with love or will he be moved with fear? He's moved with love. And they continue walking on to the daughter, to get to the daughter. And just as they step out a little bit, someone runs and says, "I hate to bring the news, but Jairus, your daughter's died. It's too late. Don't bother that teacher anymore. It's too late." Jairus' heart sinks, and Jesus says, "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Let the Spirit do its work." And they go together and they walk to the house. And when they get to the house, he asks everybody to leave. He just takes a couple of his disciples and the mother and father, and they go in that room. And then he does something. Then he touches the hand of a dead person. Now he's touched blood. Now he's touched a corpse. I mean, that's just totally, he's breaking all of these laws. But he touches these people that are supposed to be defiled. He touches them. And he touches that young girl and he says, "The spirit has been restored." You see, the other powerful thing about that is that was the power the priest had. When the priest gave sacrifice, when the people could finally go in the temple, they would say, "The spirit has been restored." Jesus used those exact words. "Your spirit has been restored." And it says she sat up and he said, "Feed her and don't tell anybody what happened. Bye, end of story." And then, and that's how it ends. Well, you can see putting these 2 stories together just turn things upside down. It's a story of priority. It's a story of an unnamed woman who everyone got frustrated. Why would you slow down and take care of this? It's a story of saying, your faith has made you whole. In and above all things, what was taking place through that story is for people to realize that you cannot contaminate love. There is nowhere where love will not go. There is no label. There is no one living on the outcast that is beyond love's reach. It was the great equalizer. You see, there was one with 12 and the other with 12. To the master teacher, they were one and the same. They were no different. It was a radical teaching that he gave for his audience. It's very much like, I like to think about electricity. You know, electricity is current, it's energy. We are beings of energy. And electricity can run through the White House or this house. Electricity can run through a palace or a pauper's place. Electricity can run through a synagogue or an ashram, or it can run through a prison. Do you get it that electricity doesn't care? Electricity never says, I don't know, that's a shady place. I'm not going to show up there. I don't know. I think I can shine for these people, but I'm not going to come on and be current for this. It's undifferentiated. What he was trying to teach is that don't judge by the outside. Just because we don't understand, we're not meant to judge. What we are meant to do is love. And so today's story, every story has been a love story. I want to invite 3 individuals to come up. I want to ask Jean and Jillian and Taylor if you would all come forward in sharing your story. Would you please welcome our storytellers today?
This is the true story of Antoinette Marie.
Antoinette, or Anne, was born in Louisiana in the summer of 1954 and grew up on the bayou, or ridiculed as a bayou rat, living in the countryside southwest of New Orleans. It was a rural fishing village of less than 2,000 residents, and it was where Anne spent her formative years.
My dad was a commercial fisherman, and even though I had an older brother, I was the one who emulated him.
Anne was a natural at sports and fishing and enjoyed being on the bayous, lakes, and swamps of southeast Louisiana. By the time she was 5 years old, she was helping her father bring in the fish that would feed the family of 6 people.
One day, when Anne was 5 years old, she and her father were coming back from running fishing traps. She asked, "Why did God make a mistake with me?"
My dad said, "What mistake?"
"I should have been born a boy. I don't understand how God could make such a mistake."
My dad's reply was, "God doesn't make mistakes."
That statement was confusing and would serve to haunt Anne for many, many years, because if God didn't make a mistake, then it was Anne who had made the mistake. Think for a moment about how you would feel if everyone insisted that you were a different gender from what you knew yourself to be. Imagine avoiding mirrors or having pictures taken because every time you saw the reflection in the mirror or the photograph, you could not believe who was looking back at you. What does a young child make of that?
It's not at all uncommon for young children to go through phases of self-expression or play gender roles, but it is very unusual for a child to unwaveringly insist that they are the opposite gender. Almost 100% of children who admittedly and consistently insist that they are the opposite gender still feel this way in old age.
There's a lot of controversy on this. However, just because you or I cannot relate or even understand someone else's experience, journey, does not make it any less true.
I started to refer to myself in the most common, closest related name to my given birth name, so Tony came into existence.
By the time Anne, now referring to herself as Tony, celebrated her 10th birthday, she was considered a freak. and a queer by classmates, an abomination by clergy and the general adult population. And during the same time, she became the caretaker of her mother and 2 young sisters because her mother started having epileptic grand mal seizures.
Her parents would ground her or send her to a priest for counseling. If she expressed her feelings as who she knew she was, the priest said her feelings and thoughts were an abomination to God. And if she didn't change the way she felt, she would burn in hell forever.
But what if you can't honestly change? What if you know who you really are inside? Can't be changed, but yet nobody accepts who you really are. How do you deal with that?
Tony's high school years were spent living in a dream of what should have been.
Tony felt, why couldn't I have what every other kid had? The ability to express budding romantic feelings, dating, dancing, friendships that were honest, wearing the clothes that she wanted, and being accepted for who she was. Gone were the days of wearing boots and jeans and button-down shirts. Tony was forced to comply with the public school's dress code of skirts and dresses and pantsuits. It was the 70s.
At the time of the senior prom, Tony asked a girl to go with her. The look on the girl's face said it all, like Tony was an alien or something. The girl snapped back, "I'm not that way." And that's when Tony realized that because she was different, because she was an abomination or a freak, no one would ever accept and love her.
This led to my first suicide attempt at 17. The only reason I sit before you today is because the gun misfired.
The gun had fired and the gunpowder ignited, but the bullets in its casing actually remained in the chamber.
My thoughts at the time were, God makes no mistakes, and I know who I truly am. Then God has to be the abomination. It was at this time that I made my first concession to not be who I truly was, and I started hiding out in the LGBT community as a lesbian.
After graduating from college with a degree in computer programming, Tony went to work in a dungeon basement for a large bank. But staying inside and working behind a desk without windows only added to the depression, and she left 6 months later.
Tony began to search for somewhere to fit in, to realize her dream of living the way she knew her true self to be. Tony's journey led her to Florida, to the Transgender Sexual Reassignment Clinic, and then to Alaska, and many other places searching for that nirvana, that place for acceptance and love. This is very common for most transgender individuals, searching for a place to belong, no matter what it takes.
But when you're not at peace with yourself, finding that place is awfully difficult or almost impossible.
On a dare, an acquaintance challenged Tony to take a first responders class.
The first responders class was a breeze for Tony. It ignited a fire like an ancient memory.
First responder, EMT, paramedic, and he even got paramedic of the year. And then became the assistant director from EMS services.
When I finally entered medicine, it was like I had been here before. It was an ancient feeling that every time I went to work, I knew. I had the idea, I had the knowledge, I had the insight to treat people. Even though I didn't have the quote-unquote official education, I knew what I was doing. I worked hard and was recognized for the work that I did.
But work became an obsession and an escape.
But trying to keep up the facade of hiding who she really was leading her through a life without joy or fulfilling intimate relationships.
A second suicide attempt was made because even though she had made great strides in her professional life, her world came crashing down when her landlord assumed she was a homosexual and gave her 36 hours to vacate the apartment. Obviously, that attempt failed as
Thank
well.
God for that.
In 1992, after Tony's father died, she moved to Oregon and changed her name, which gave her a legal male moniker, Taylor Rain. In Oregon, he finally found a counselor who helped put things together. It was with her that he finally could fully embrace who he was, in spite of social rhetoric and religious dogma.
While working as a paramedic in Oregon, Taylor was called out to a horrific automobile accident, and he refused to give up on someone that everyone expected would die. Afterward, the surgeon credited Taylor's wisdom and dedication to saving the life of this young girl.
This girl was the granddaughter of a local Native American tribal chief. He tracked down Taylor and insisted that he come visit.
And Taylor eventually accepted the request and visited the chief, who brought him to the elders of the tribe.
They seemed to see him for who he truly was, and they invited him on a vision quest onto Mount Shasta.
All my life, I felt a very strong spiritual connection to Mother Earth, Father Sky. So I gladly accepted the invitation.
While wandering the mountain, Taylor received the insight to the remarkable gift Great Spirit had bestowed on him. The gift of twin spirits, with the ability to see the world through both the male and female perspective.
To welcome and honor that gift gave me power. It empowered me, it gave me confidence. I came down the mountain a new person.
Now a person with a clear purpose and understanding of who he was and what he was supposed to do.
My trip to Mount Shasta changed my life. To further my understanding and purpose, I found unity in Ashland, Oregon. Could it be a twin sister here to Asheville? For the first time, I sat in a church and didn't hear anybody speaking about going to hell. Felt love, peace, and acceptance. And I thought, wow, this might work for me. All the loneliness and heartache started to fade, and for the first time in 20 years, I actually cared if I lived or died.
All of his life, he had made concessions to fit in. And the biggest was to forego transitioning from female to male, to be his authentic self.
He decided if he was ever going to be able to afford the surgical procedures needed to fulfill his dreams, he needed a better paying job. So Taylor left the West Coast in 2000 and returned to Louisiana.
I'm an alumni of Nicholls State University, Harvard on the Bayou. And I swear to God, it's a bumper sticker. And I was accepted and enrolled into nursing school. This was the last time I compromised my authentic self by agreeing to participate as a female, wearing dresses to clinical rounds and stuff. But after I graduated, I burned every article of women's clothing that I had. I would never again dishonor my authentic self.
While preparing for transition, Taylor met and married another nurse who supported and encouraged his journey. She was instrumental in helping him through the transition.
So in 2009, I finally started hormone replacement therapy.
Now remember from earlier, from the time Taylor was 12 years old, he refused to look in a mirror. He also refused to have a picture taken for many years.
So after 8 months of therapy, I remember walking past the bathroom mirror and saw this reflection of this guy standing there. And I stopped and I turned around and I said, oh my God, there you finally are. As tears filled my eyes and streamed down my face.
Although the marriage didn't survive, they did remain great friends. And Taylor was and is provided the opportunity to be a dad to her little girl.
That's 8 months after therapy, the start of therapy. Okay. Oh, okay. I got caught up in the picture. All right. After moving to western North Carolina, I'll get it out. In 2015, and again, once being in the mountains, I found unity here.
Right here is where Taylor met people who accepted him fully for who he is, without any label.
And it is here where he again found love in a woman who respects and supports him.
I've been blessed with her acceptance for who I am without question or without labels.
From an educational perspective, it's important to pause here and point out that gender identification such as male, female, trans male, non-conforming, non-binary is not the same as orientation. Straight, gay, lesbian, transsexual, bisexual. And as Taylor says, using the bathroom of your identified gender doesn't lead to anything other than answering the call of nature.
True. I agree. My life has been more fulfilled than in any other time in my existence. I am a seeker of the truth. My family accepts me. I have the genuine love of a very kind, sweet woman, a sweet child, and good friends who have walked with me on this journey. Since transitioning, I've had the opportunity to support other individuals and families that are seeking to understand what it means to be transgender, two-spirited. Unfortunately, I've seen way too much self-mutilation and suicide by our young. Often the general public who do not understand or take the opportunity to learn will reject and demonize their own kids and us. I'm being very vulnerable in sharing my story with you. It is not an easy task, but I hope it will help you to see that I am a child of God and not just a label that somebody decided to stick to me. My name is Taylor Rain Cologne, and I thank you for allowing me to share my story with you.
Taylor, thank you for your willingness to put a face in place of a label. Many people don't know, and many people judge out of that ignorance. What you are doing is very healing today, and we would like to express this back to you, to Taylor. We love you. We bless you. We appreciate you, and we behold the divinity in you. You're officially out of the closet. Grab a notebook. The same writer that I quoted, Robin Meyer, says in the book, Saving Jesus from the Church, I'm longing for the church that wakes up in the morning and listens to the Spirit. I'm longing for the church that is obedient to the Spirit. He said, when is the last time we heard a church rise up and say to the world, if you want to get to that group of people, you'll have to come through this church first. If you want to pick on these children of God, this church is going to be there first. I want to reflect back to you. You are that church. You are that church that holds that love. It's not about understanding. It's about holding that love. And it's one reason that we're able to do this. We're part of one family, the family of God, breathing one spirit, living one life. We're in this together, finding our way. Let love be our guiding light, and on course we'll stay. Sing it out. So, we're part of one family, family of God, family of God, breathing one spirit, living one life. We're in this together, finding our way. Let love be our guiding light, and on course we'll stay. I invite you to close your eyes and for just a moment to put your hands on your heart. And do this in such a way that you can feel your own heartbeat. You know, really, there's one heartbeat. Every life is being animated by the one source. Every heart is being pulsated by this one electromagnetic power energy that we can't even wrap our mind around. The same force field that makes a compass go north, south, east, or west. The same magnetic earth that guides a dolphin is the same energy that beats our heart. And this energy is so mysterious in many ways, and yet it is absolutely personal because we feel it as love. We feel it in the connection. We feel the healing that takes place when we can be present for one another. When we can transcend the need to identify with another story or even understand it or accept it. That's neither here nor there. Hopefully, as the stories in the Gospels we're also seeking to illustrate. It's the labels, it's the made-up rules, it's all of these things that get confused. But when it's our son, when it's our daughter, love, would you come to my house? Our goal is to love every child as our own son, our own daughter. To love every being as an expression of the divine. So we give thanks for this life energy that lives us. We give thanks for what it means to be a part of the family of God. That's the best family on earth. And we give thanks for what it means to grow, to live on the edge of our own becoming. That we may continually anchor more understanding, more awareness. We may hold it. So very gently just open your eyes and look around. The diverse faces that are here. Now just imagine if we could grab people from all continents, place little short people, all different colored people, young, age, tribal. If we could all stand together and just look at one another. And to truly hold it in our heart and to know we're part of one family, the family of and on course we'll stay. Sing it for the world. We're part